In most of your companies, as I suggested earlier, you've got a couple of buckets of spending, and you've got this sort of what I'll call trade, and you've got brand. And the only way I'm going to win as a retailer in the future is to sort of participate in all forms of that funding. Well, so this is the brand. But interestingly enough, if you look at the retailers, the retailer too has a bucket of spending. And if you take the typical sort of large-scale retailer, I'm going to keep the numbers really simple just because my brain can only handle that. Let's assume that we're talking with a retailer that starts with about a 30% gross margin or 38% gross margin, and they land with a 28% gross margin. That means that they're spending about 1,000 basis points on price. Does everyone follow? Pretty straightforward. I'm spending about 1,000 basis points on pricing. And if I looked, as I suggested earlier, if I went into Kimberly-Clark, or if I went into all these large sort of brand companies, Apple, everybody's got different levels of spending. And some of those trade spend numbers in some companies are near zero, and then other companies are at 25%. But just assume that if you went into the normal sort of big packaged good company, they're spending 1,500 basis points, 15% on price discounts. And in some cases, that number is much higher. It's 25%. Again, there's a wide range. So we're both investing in price. Do we agree? We're both investing in price. Your price is to me, sometimes I pass that through to the consumer. But what I really want all of you to know as I go into this discussion is whenever you see a discount in a store, it's normal that for every dollar you give to me, I match it. So for every dollar that you see discount, I'm putting up $1, or I'm putting up 50 cents, and brands are usually putting up 50 cents. So this money flows into my trade spend, or into my, in effect, my consumer spending. And then we both have money that we spend below the line that I'll simply call brand. Now, interestingly, if you were to sit back and say, well, that seems to be working, we know how to negotiate with one another, and so why would anyone start worrying about how we price? What's wrong with the revenue management model that we have inside of our company today? And the answer to this is actually pretty straightforward. One is, consumers may or may not be listening anymore to my price messaging in the store, and more importantly than that, they may not see the price messaging in the store. Secondly, as store-based retailers, I have huge speed disadvantages, and those speed disadvantages are that the people I'm competing with, namely online retailers, can price and reprice much faster than I'm able to. Thirdly, I'm going to show you here in a minute what we actually do to price, and how we create a price, how we get there, and I think you're going to see that the complexity is overwhelming. When you see what we go through as a retailer to set a shelf price, I think you're going to be overwhelmed. And then synchronizing, maintaining margin, lots of different reasons why price doesn't work. So why should I change? I've got this sort of interesting model. I do mass promotion, I do targeted offers. I have a lot of different ways that I spend this money today. So if you went into your typical customer today and said, let me go through your accounting records. I want to see how you spend your money. Well, this is what I spent most of my year doing this year, is trying to get behind, so where is the money? Like, where do you really spend it? And what you find out pretty quickly is that they have, just as you do, very specific buckets of money. And so some of that money is spent on very mass-oriented. In other words, it's not targeted to any individual. And then some of these are highly targeted buckets, very targeted, which means I'm going after a specific audience, or there's a specific requirement. There's something that constitutes performance in order to get the discount. So as we kind of work our way through this, and you think about, well, how would you think about changing this? Why would we want to do anything different? And the answer to this is that store-based retailers are losing price leadership. Now, I'm going to use the US model for just a minute if I can. And what I'd like everyone to know about the store-based world is that companies like Walmart went out into the world and they created a cost structure. And that cost structure was really all about enabling the organization to get to an even lower price. And so what happened when they had a low cost structure is that cost structure for them allowed them to actually be the price reference point in the marketplace, right? So low cost structure, I'm not differentiated, I'm low cost. It allowed me to the price reference point. And so what happened then is that all the other retailers in the marketplace, whether we like it or not, that is as Walmart, everybody learned how to price against me, right, Wayne? They all learned how to do it. How do they know? They all used analytics, they all used business tools. Thank you for rejoining us. And they all used different approaches in order to learn what their price gaps were. And so it's interesting, if you worked at Walgreens, you would quickly know that whatever sold at Walmart, I can actually charge 28% more. And Boots knows the same thing. In other words, this goes on everywhere in the world. Every retailer manages their price gaps, so they're called. Now, what's interesting is that works pretty well as long as we have a reference point. And so what's happened, just to use the US as an example, we could use Canada as an example. There's a lot of different markets that we could use as an example, but the real push here is really pretty simple, is that when Amazon becomes the price leader, in other words, it becomes the place where consumers go to check price first, or Alibaba becomes the place where people go to check price first, then what's really hard is, how do I know what the price gap is? Because what we learn quickly is that Amazon doesn't price like the rest of us. Now, the same thing is true if you go to Ocado. I mean, in other words, we can translate this across markets. So I keep pointing to Amazon, but I use that as a generic term. So imagine you're Walmart and you know that everybody has followed you for years. Whatever pricing strategy you looked, that just automatically set up the pricing. And then what I could do if I was a competitive retailer is I could just go home and set my pricing strategy against that. So what is it that Amazon does that's so complicated for me? Well, the way they arrive at price is completely different. So there's 5 inputs to price at Amazon, and there's very little human intervention. There's like 2 or 3 departments where I know there's some human intervention, but it's really minimal. That's in toys, some consumer electronics. Everything else, once that price is set from initial price, the technology, in a sense, takes over, and it reprices and sets itself against the market all the time. So the first thing is, in every category, in every market, again, they take it one country at a time, not one postal card at a time. They actually have in every category 2 or 3 what they call reference retailers. They have to be credible reference retailers. So in toys, it might include someone like Toys R Us, even though we may not think of them as a great retailer, but in toys, they're credible, right? In beauty care, it might include Boots, but even though you may not think of them as sort of credible, but from Walmart's point of view, not Walmart, excuse me, from Amazon's point of view. Now, what's really important about this, guys, is that you may be selling a 12-pack of product in one of their credible retailers, but they don't look at it on a 12-pack basis. They look the 12-pack divided by 12. They look at it on a per unit basis. So it's really important that you understand that they look at the price point per unit. So bundling and packaging doesn't change anything from their point of view. Secondly, is they check their prices against the third-party marketplace. So this is sort of interesting. If you're somebody who's actually selling on their website, they do an incredibly good job. You can sell lots of volume on Amazon.com, just to come over to this chart for a minute. And what Amazon will do to you is they actually are looking at what you're selling as a third-party reseller, and they're actually trying to manage. Now, what's so important here, and it's a little overwhelming to understand they have this capability. If you're a third-party reseller, they can make money from you 2 or 3 different ways. I can make money from you based on the transaction. I charge you a transaction fee. If I'm storing the inventory and I'm pick-packing and shipping the inventory, I actually charge you another fee for doing that when the product is sold. And when the game is all over with, I could get 30% of the retail price without ever doing anything but enabling you to sell on my platform. So what Amazon does all the time is they're monitoring third-party resellers, And as they do that, they're actually making this decision in a real live automated way as to whether they want to match that third-party player or they want to let the third party win the buy box based on how much they're going to make. It has nothing to do with who the shopper is. Nothing. Has nothing to do with the geography. It has only to do with what's the way that I'm going to make the most money. So they can actually compete then against their third-party marketplace. If we could go back to the slide. They actually look at each SKU, it's prioritized, they have a way of sort of, in a sense, looking at stock status. So they'll actually reprice an item differently and with a different frequency based on how big the on-hands are. If they have very high inventory quantities, they may go ahead and allow the repricing to happen. This is all automated. The technology will say, wow, we have 5 days of inventory, let's get going, right? Win the buy box. Or it may say, wait a second, there's only 2 units left. Hold on, let the reseller, let that third party person sell it. So look at guys, there's nobody intervening with this. This is all automated. It's all going on while you're staring at the screen. On some level, while you guys don't have these, they do look at manufacturers' suggested retail prices. But what really happens here then is that every product in the portfolio, 20 million products then, are subject to this kind of pricing and repricing as I've described. Now what's different, and the reason why we will see different prices, is because within the 20 million SKUs, they get priced with a very different frequency, a really different frequency. And this is where we as store-based retailers have the hardest time. So specifically at Amazon, there are at least 4 tiers of products. There's 5 sometimes. And if you're in the tier 1 SKU, this is really interesting. There's about 100,000 SKUs in the first tier, about that number. Again, across all these, so it's really the highest velocity products. I'm looking at competition, I'm looking at third-party resellers, I can see what's selling. And these are products that are going to get repriced at least twice a day. So they're going to run through the algorithm twice a day. Now we price nationally, so we're only going to use one price in the UK. We're only going to use one price in all of Canada. We're only going to use one price in the US. So everybody heard that? We're only going to use one price. Now some of you are probably really comfortable with that statement, but I'm a retailer and I have 88 price zones. Everybody know what a zone is, right? I know who can pay a little bit more. I know they're not paying, I can charge rich people a little bit more. And so I have these price zones. And so while this is very uncomfortable to talk about, what I can share with you is that somewhere between 60 or 80% of my annual profit is based on those price zones. Let me say that differently. If I did, forget that I matched Amazon. If I just flattened the earth so that in Canada, I had to price everything without, I'm Loblaw. I've got to flatten the earth, no price zones, right? Just one price for Canada like Amazon does, 80% of my operating profit. Everyone follow? So it's a very big difference in how their pricing works. Band 2 will get approached sort of daily. Band 3 will get approached weekly. 300,000 SKUs. Now, Julie, how many SKUs are in an average Walmart supercenter or a Tesco hypermarket or a Carrefour hypermarket? How many SKUs do we have? 100,000 SKUs, 80,000 SKUs, sometimes at 120. What's a Tesco having at 120? Well, it depends on the size of the building. Call it 100, right? So I can promise you there's a pretty perfect match in those first 300 bands, or those first 3 brands, except fresh food. There's not going to be a lot of product that you have in your store that isn't in those first 3 brands. Now what happens is in tier 4, and they actually sometimes have a tier 5, those products sort of get repriced just weekly, monthly. It's really, there's no particular reason to run these things through a repricing. So why would I take you through this exercise this late in the day when everybody just wants to go have a cold beer, right? So the answer is that how do I compete against a national price when I'm zone? How do I compete when I have, in effect, a pricing cycle that starts 6 months out, but it's really a 52-week cycle, and I can't reprice except once a week, and it always takes labor. It takes people to go do it. And so if you really look at the structural issue that I face here, consumers can save 25% above Walmart's price without a fee. In other words, they don't pay shipping. 70% of this stuff goes out without a fee. So they can basically buy below Walmart with no freight. Hello? And how do they do that? Because Apple advertises on our platform. Because Coca-Cola advertises on our platform. We have different revenue streams. So as you start to think about this, what happens then during the course of the day is that you'll see some retailers, this is an older chart, but I wanted to show it to you. You'll see some retailers are actually running one price during the course of the day. You'll see some other people that actually will try to compete against us. People like Best Buy might raise or lower prices. They're an electronics retailer in the US, just as an example. But what you'll see happening at Amazon is you'll see this pricing moving all through the day. And you'll say, what's driving that? And the answer is there's 3 or 4 inputs, but no human intervention. And you might think you're getting a personalized price because Paul went on and he saw a price, you went on, you saw a price, and you said, wow, I've got a price. That's not what's happening. There's no personalization. So national, automated, no personalization. And so as you play this out for yourself, you start thinking about, so this buyer doesn't have anything to do with this. What are they really doing on here? And I just want to say to you that the way they manage price in the end is they put it on the brand. They put it back on you. Well, the price is low because of you. And the way they do this, the negotiation is completely different than anything I've ever seen in my life. They have these things called item P&Ls. And I'll leave you with this thought here that item P&Ls they do not tie out to the accounting records. But what they attempt to do is to show you when I look at all your costs, all your rebates, all the work I have to do to engage with your products, and anyone who's ever dealt with this retailer knows that these P&Ls are taken very seriously. And if you don't give me a certain contribution margin on the bottom line, remember, the merchant's not managing price. The technology is managing price. So what they're basically saying to you is, if you take me below 0, I'm going to turn you off. It's called crapping out. C-R-A-P. Can't realize a profit. Sorry. So the point is that what I'd like you to what I want you to realize is that imagine the technology at Tesco just turning off your product because they don't make money. And then effectively what I do is I say to you, come and see me. Last quarter, I lost $1 million on your products. I lost $1 million. And so what I want to do is I want to turn you back on, but I need you to bring me the $1 million from last quarter, and I think I'm going to lose another $1 million this quarter. So let's just go ahead and bring me $2 million, and I'm going to turn you back on. And the answer really is that you have to sit down with them and manage this in a completely different way. Because what they're going to force you to do is not manage price, they're going to make you manage cost. And it's not going to be product cost. It might be freight, it might be inbound freight, it might be handling costs. I want to have you change your packaging. I want you to change the assortment. I want you to get the cost down. Because this is a P&L. This is a manufacturer, bottler-styled P&L. It's fully loaded with cost, and only you can change it. So it's a completely different negotiation model because I'm not trying to negotiate product cost. I'm trying to negotiate all costs. So as you think about your world, the last point about digital retailers is there's no such thing as high-low. There's no such as convenience premium. They do all of it. So if you took a Walmart or a Tesco, a Carrefour, a Boots, a Watson's, you could look at all those retailers, and their history is they have one model or another. High-low, EDLP, they have one model or another. But if you actually look at the hypermarkets, what you'll quickly see, it's not hypermarkets, sorry, the marketplaces, you'll actually see that they're about 50% of their spend is actually high-low, and then the balance of it is spread across convenience, some EDLP, and of course, some very targeted sort of loyalty-oriented activities. And so what really happens, and this is the push for the Coca-Cola system, we've worked really hard to move retailers away from one another, in a sense, so everybody can coexist, and they've done a really good job of managing their price gaps. What the web is basically doing is it's eliminating those channels. Every product is out there. And what we'll find out in this world of dynamic pricing is when Walmart goes down, Amazon goes down. When Target goes down, Amazon goes down. And so no matter who's on deal, what we find out is the digital guys are always on deal. And then Walmart goes down too. So you're now in this cycle where everybody is comping against everybody else in that marketplace. So we'll simply say to you that as we kind of move through this, what I want you to remember is these marketplaces are highly automated. It's a very item and unit oriented. They always match the lowest price. They don't go for a middle ground. They always match the lowest price. They're very velocity based, or not velocity based, they're all view weighted. So if you actually want to get volume, you can't go to the merchant and say, move me up, make me more visible. It's all based on your click stream. It's a pretty different environment. So I'd like to close this discussion, because I know I need to, and simply say to you that when you look at the distinction between how pricing is established in a store-based world and how it's established in a digital world, it's completely different, completely different. And what's happening is that stores are moving to digital. That's all you need to know. Stores are moving to the digital model. So if you said, Dan, what's the future? It's not the middle column here. It's not where the merchant's in control. It's where the technology is actually setting the price. If the level of automation isn't, somebody's providing analytics to a merchant or pricing expert, it's automated pricing. And we'll just use demand elasticities and so on. The data isn't going to be historical. It's going to be real time. Here's what's happening in the market today. And if you think about this, it's not going to be a bunch of people multifunctional. It's not going to be 52 weeks. And it's not going to be 80 different price zones. This is a big deal. This is a very big deal because bottlers, if we just started with the bottler networks, have their own approach sometimes within their geographies. And sometimes I'm a retailer who crosses those geographies and I can have two different experiences. And now I want to bring one overlay approach so I can remain competitive against these digital retailers. So when you think about what we have to go do and the process that we're going to see our folks go through, is they're going to move to a completely different and highly automated pricing model. So if you sat down with a couple of my clients today that have gone through this, it took them 2 years to basically figure out how to do this, and lots of money and lots of people. So if you work this in reverse, they had to figure out the right rules. Rules are hard to write, they're hard to code. They had to figure out what the right metrics were. Again, I'm going in reverse. They had to figure out what the right metrics were and then align the metrics with a rule, because pricing is the fastest way to lose money. And then once I did that, I had to figure out how to connect those two things with the physical shelf. Because if I move to a different kind of pricing model and I don't have a way to impact the shelf, I've lost my dream. I've lost my vision of competing. And then I've got to go back up to the top if you could. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3. I've got to then begin to think about how I want to apply those rules and how do I want to direct my money. And as you really look at this process traditionally in a retail is a nonstop process. It can take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. There's a lot of work that goes into pricing. And now I have to be able to do it like this. I've got to be able to reset as the market resets. You can see that this is quite a challenge for any retailer that's out in the marketplace today.